everyone, welcome back. My name's Diana. This is my channel Bookish Di, and today I am wrapping up the 5 books that I read in September. So I had initially done a larger TBR both for the Magical Readathon and for Sci-Fi September, and I ended up not completing either of those TBRs, partially because I started playing some more games in the month of September. So I started playing Spiritfarer, I started playing Pokemon Shield, I played Jedi Fallen Order, and so that ate up a lot of my reading time. And the other part is I was just not really in the right brain space to be reading. Term at the university I work at was starting, and there was just kind of more uncertainty and stress around that, so it just kind of sapped my energy. And then towards the last part of September, some news broke from my other fandom, essentially women's soccer, that just like sent me into a rage spiral. Hey, Bubby. And I just did not get a lot of reading done over the month of September. But what I did read, I actually really enjoyed. It was a very good reading month for me. So let's get into it. The first book I read was The Dating Playbook by Farah Rochon. This is a contemporary romance. It is the second book in her Boyfriend Project series. This book follows Taylor, who is a personal fitness trainer, and Jamar, who is a former, hey Bobbies, who is a former NFL player who is trying to get back into the league after a very bad knee injury. And so he decides to hire Taylor after seeing her fitness workouts on YouTube and thinking that she could be someone who could really get him to the next level so that he could compete. So I really enjoyed this. I had read the first book in this series, The Boyfriend Project, last year. And the premise of this series is that these 3 women, Samia, who's the female lead for The Boyfriend Project, Taylor, who's the lead for this book, and London, who's the lead for the next book, all find out that the same guy had been dating all 3 of them at the same time, and they confront him and it goes viral. And the 3 of them decide that they're, 1, going to be friends, and then 2, they're going to try and work on things that aren't dating. And so with this book, one of the things Taylor's trying to do is get her personal fitness coaching and personal health coaching off the ground, because she's been a little stalled. And one of the things for her that's been a stumbling block is she doesn't have a college degree, which is one of the requirements that people have for someone doing like PE teaching or writing in a magazine. And so she's trying to motivate herself to go back to school, but she runs into difficulty because she does have an undiagnosed learning disorder. She I believe ends up getting diagnosed with ADHD. And Jamar is dealing with a lot of grief, and a lot of burdens that he's placed on himself that you find out throughout the book, dealing with his backstory, and you find out why he's so driven to go back into the NFL. And one thing I forgot to mention, one trope that happens in this book that I really love is fake dating, because Jamar doesn't want folks to know that he's trying to get back into the NFL. And so when he and Taylor meet a reporter at University of Texas football practice that he's kind of there to see and provide some moral support to the players, Taylor panics and says, oh no, we're dating. I'm not helping him with personal training. So I really liked that component. I liked the development of the relationship between Taylor and Jamar. I really enjoy the continuing friendships between Taylor, Samia, and London. This does have my dreaded third act dark moment that I'm not a huge fan of in romance. It is what it is. I'm trying not to dock too many points from romances that deal with this trope. But overall, I did enjoy this quite a lot. I liked the main characters. I really liked the discussion about what it's like to be a Black woman who who is getting diagnosed with ADHD later in life. And I think this actually works as a really good continuation of what we saw with, the Reluctant Royal series and Portia by Alyssa Cole, because I think Taylor is similar to Portia, where she's dealing with the difficulties that come with having this undiagnosed learning disability, but also she and Portia are in different spots in their lives, and I think Taylor doesn't have the same self-sabotaging that Portia did. Anyway, I really enjoyed this book. I ended up giving it 3.75 out of 5 stars, and I would say if you're looking for a fun contemporary romance series, to definitely check out The Boyfriend Project and The Dating Playbook. Just a heads up for The Dating Playbook, there is a lot of discussion about food and portions, so if that is something that triggers you, you might want to steer clear. It's not fat shaming, but because part of Taylor's job is to be this personal fitness consultant, that does include meal planning, and so just heads up on that. The second book that I read this past month was Alatsue by Darcy Little Badger with illustrations by Rovina Kai. This is a contemporary fantasy novel, or YA novel, that is set in an America that is very similar to our own, but there is magic, and so I think there would be that are well known and accepted. So like fairy ring transport is a common form of transportation for those with Fae blood. There's Native American traditions that get explored in this one. So this book follows Ellie Alatsue, and she has the ability to see ghosts, to bring forth the ghosts of animals. And so she has her ghost dog, her grandmother has a ghost mammoth, and the plot of the story kicks off with her cousin's death. And based on a dream that Ellie has, and how her ghost dog, whose name I cannot remember, Kirby, and based on how Kirby reacts, she's pretty sure this isn't just an accidental death, that this was some form of murder. And so she tells her parents, and her parents believe her. And so they go to try and figure out what happened to Ellie's cousin and stop whatever killed him and bring them to justice. So I really enjoyed this book. I thought that the world building was really interesting. I really enjoyed Ellie as a character, and I really appreciated that, one, she was ace, and two, that she had this very open and comfortable relationship with her parents. One thing I've noticed with a lot of YA books is that parents are either clueless or they're antagonistic towards the protagonist, and there's none of that here. Ellie's parents know about her abilities. Her mom is the one who taught her, because it's a family gift that's passed down through her mother's line, and they both trust her judgment. And so when she says someone killed our cousin, and this isn't a natural death, they believe her, and they want to keep her safe and make sure that she's not putting herself in too much danger, but they trust her enough to know that there is probably something at the root of her concerns, and that it's something that they should take seriously. And I thought that was just a really refreshing change of pace from a number of YA fantasy books. So loved that. I really enjoyed Ellie's relationship with her friend Jay, and how there was no romantic tension between them, how they're just besties, and how Jay is just completely accepting of Ellie's asexuality. I liked the fact that kind of some throwaway plot points that happened in the first part of this book come back into play in the second half with the reveal. Yeah, overall, I'm trying to think. Overall, I did enjoy this book. I did have some issues with the pacing, and just how some flashbacks were kind of interspersed. But for the most part, I thought this was a very, very good debut. I really enjoyed the characters. I really liked the plot. I cannot wait to see what Darcy Little Badger does next. I know she has a book coming out in November, which I'm pretty sure I'm going to be pre-ordering based on how much I enjoyed this. So I gave this 4.25 out of 5 stars, and I would highly, highly recommend it if you like contemporary fantasy stories, and YA protagonists, and just ghost dogs. Ghost dogs are pretty great. So yeah, I really enjoyed this. I had read this because this is up for the Lodestar Award for the Not a Hugos. After that, I read When Sorrows Come by Shauna McGuire. This is the 15th book in the October Days series, and this is Toby gets married, but first she has to deal with a plot to overthrow the High King and Queen, and that is all the description for the plot that I'm going to give, because it does get fairly spoiler, because this is, you know, an ongoing series. It's book 15, and I don't want to talk too much about the specifics of the plot. However, I loved this book. So I had mentioned in previous videos that I was a little worried about this book based on the title, but I shouldn't have. This book really felt like a warm hug in the form of a book. This was Shauna McGuire saying, yes, this past year has been absolute shit. I know we're in the middle of a pandemic. I know things are hard. Here, have a book where things turn out good for Toby, where you get to see people you might not have seen in a while, where everyone ends up happy, except for one person who meh. And you get little hints about some ongoing plot stuff. But for the most part, it was just a warm hug of a book with lots of blood, because it is October Day novel, and it wouldn't be one of those without copious amounts of blood. It did feel like the end of Arc 2 to me, so whereas A Killing Frost did have like the kind of thematic end to Arc 2 with what happens in that book, this one felt like the emotional end to Arc 2. It felt like a breather episode. It felt like okay, things are calm for the time being. Let's just let everyone relax for a while before Arc 3 picks up. And so yeah, I adored this book. It made me so happy. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars just for like the emotional catharsis. Like, you know, maybe it's not everyone's cup of tea, but for me, this is just exactly what I wanted out of this book and this particular entry into the series, and I got it. Following that, I read The Unspoken Name by A.K. Larkwood. This is the first book in a epic fantasy series. It follows a orc priestess, I cannot remember how to pronounce her name. Kasorwe. So she is the bride to, she's a sacrifice to the unspoken god, and when she's 14, she's supposed to go up a mountain and sacrifice herself for this god. But before that happens, a mysterious wizard who has just visited her nunnery invites her to join him on his quest to find this ancient relic. And so she goes, and her story goes from there. So I really enjoyed this. This book is very different from a lot of epic fantasy that I read. So one is the protagonist. So Kasorwe is an orc. She is someone who was raised in this fairly isolated community. And so part of her story in this book is this growing understanding of herself and the world around her, and figuring out what does she want out of life. So it's not just what people are telling her she should want or just pointing her in a direction. It's her discovering what does she want and trying to achieve those goals. I also really enjoyed the world building with this book. So one thing that I found absolutely fascinating was that there are different worlds that are connected by these Stargate-like gates, and, which you can kind of see in this map, where you can see these gates. They're like Stargates. So it's not just like one world with a bunch of different countries. These are multiple worlds, and they're connected by this entity called the maze. And when worlds die, they get absorbed into the maze. And I thought that the gods were also interesting. And yeah, I very much enjoyed this book. Again, similar to Alatso, I did have some issues with the pacing, but I really liked the relationships between Kasorwe, her employer, who I am forgetting his name, Belthandros, and then you also have Kasorwe's relationship with one of her coworkers, Tal, who I literally spent most of this book being like, Tal and Kasorwe, please stop fighting and unionize against your boss who is kind of terrible, and that way you can, you know, take power back and not deal with his bullshit anymore. So that was really interesting. And yeah, there's just a lot that happens in this book that as it unfolds, things that happened earlier make a lot of sense. And so book 2 is coming out next spring, and I'm very interested to see what happens based on how it ends. This is, you know, just a very interesting queer fantasy novel, and I would really recommend it. I picked this up because I had some friends who had raved about it, who had read it in 2020 and really enjoyed it. And so I bought it in 2020 and just never got around to reading it before now. And A.K. Larkwood is up for the Astounding Award for Best New Author. So I very much enjoyed this. I gave this 4.25 out of 5 stars and would highly recommend it for anyone looking for something epic fantasy related. The last book that I read in the month of September was Aetherbound by E.K. Johnston. So this is a YA science fantasy novel following a young girl, Pent Harland, who is raised on her family starship, and she has the gift to manipulate the Aether, but not in a way that benefits her family from a young age. So she is deemed useless until she's 18 and is only given enough food to get by. And so before her 18th birthday, she hatches a plot to get out of her family starship onto Bannock Station, where she meets twins Ned and Fisher, who have need of her, and just what happens when the three of them meet and plot to change everything. So this was a book I had very high hopes for, and it didn't quite meet those expectations. So this was good. Like, I definitely enjoyed it, but this was a book that I think could have used another 50 pages. So this is very fast paced. And it's also fairly short. It is under 250 pages. And I know E.K. Johnston likes to write shorter books, but this is one where I think it could have been bumped up, because a lot happens and it doesn't always feel like the characters have room to breathe, and there are certain transitions that happen pretty quickly. So that's my main issue with this book, is the pacing component. Otherwise, in terms of like the character and the world building, I definitely enjoyed it. This world, where this story takes place is in the remnants of a galactic empire. And I'm sorry if you can hear my upstairs neighbors stomping around. And at the end of their empire, space stations that they had built to try and conquer a neighboring star system rise up in revolts. And so the empire creates a system where these stations can only function if there is someone with a Y chromosome on the station, and they hold hostages. And so what Pent, Ned, and Fisher are trying to do is change the system. And I liked that component. I really enjoyed Pent and her determination to get herself out of the bad situation that she's in and try and find a space for herself where she can be appreciated. I enjoyed her relationship with both twins, Ned and Fisher. This is a very queer story, again, which I appreciate. Heads up with this book for massive amounts of medical trauma, food counting, abuse in the forms of limiting the amount of food someone can have. There's a lot of family, like Pent's family, her birth family, they're not good people. There's a lot of abuse that happens from them to her. So just, again, be aware of that going in. But for the most part, I did enjoy this book. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and I'm very interested to see what happens next based on the epilogue that at the end of the book, as well as some hints that E.K. Johnston has put out on Twitter as to what she's plotting. So again, I really wish this was a slightly longer book, because I think what this book was trying to achieve would have worked out so much better had it had that extra 50 pages. So that's my September in books. For the most part, really good. Like, I didn't rate anything below 3.75, which is fantastic. So while there wasn't a lot of quantity, it made up for it in quality. So I can deal with that. I'm happy with that. So did any of the books that I read in September sound interesting to you? Have you read any of them, and do you have opinions? Please let me know down below, and if you like what you see, please like and subscribe. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will talk with you later. Bye.